Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Zero Carbon Future Pavilion powered by Clean Air Task Force. Before we get started, I'd like to draw your attention to the QR codes on either side of the pavilion, as well as in the back. That will give you access to live transcription and translation services if you need it. Today's conversation is really focused, and really at COP, we're focused on how countries can work together to advance the transition to a zero carbon energy system, and how we can unlock the technologies and the policies that will be needed to achieve that. My name is David Yellen. I'm a strategic advisor with the Clean Air Task Force, and I'm thrilled to have you here for this conversation. I'm thrilled to welcome Isabel Munilla, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Multilateral Engagement, Climate, and Market Development at the U.S. Department of Energy, and Jin Yamaguchi, Special Advisor to Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry, and Director of JETRO New York. These industries that we're talking about are going to be hugely valuable, and that is driving intense economic competition to develop these technologies internationally. The renewable energy market alone is expected to be worth upwards or near $2 trillion globally in 2030, which is much larger than today's natural gas market, for context. And that is just renewables. That's not including the other clean decarbonization technologies that will be needed. So there's huge value here. And there's probably enough value to go around. But today's conversation is really focused on how we advance competition, which drives innovation in these industries, while also enabling the cooperation and collaboration that we're focused on here at COP that will be equally critical to making sure technologies are available when and where we need them. So Jin, I'd love to start with you. Part of your role as special advisor at METI is to explore partnerships for Japanese industry and engage with other countries on where we can cooperate. And Japan is investing 2 trillion yen in a green innovation fund, 20 trillion yen in GX green transformation. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what is Japan's role in these growing industries internationally, and what role can it play around the world?
Well, thank you very much. I'm Jin Yamaguchi, Special Advisor to METI. I'm based now in New York, but come to Dubai. So. Thank you very much. And responding to your question, you're right. So Japan is heavily invested in energy transition and, of course, Green Innovation Fund and also the upcoming green transformation supporting for that 20 trillion is a significant money. And we are not just focusing on renewable, but also first of all, we are focusing on energy efficiency, how to increase that. And at the same time, of course, with clean energy, we are also focusing on how to advance nuclear energy and also the renewables and also the CCUS and other technology as well. And how to advance that? Of course, it's a mix of policy measures. We are saying it's a combination between the regulation and also incentives. So we are seeing we are setting the clear target for 2030. So as for renewables, we are setting the almost doubling our Japan's portion of renewable from around 20% to 36 to 38% is our target. So in order to achieve that, we still have our feed-in tariff system, but in addition to that, how to increase renewable portion, we need to have many measures at the same time. So including the R&D pushing for the new technology like a perovskite starting from 2025, and also advancing the offshore wind, and also how to achieve that goal. We need to have using not just near offshore, but also the more remote area like EEZ. So therefore, we are also thinking about new measures in order to use that remote area for the offshore wind. So that kind of policy mix is very important, and we are doing maximum effort to do that, in Japan. And I can talk about the impact of other, U.S. measures later,
Thank you very much. I think, I'm very interested to hear, given Japan's unique context and interest in the energy transition, further thoughts. I think before we dive deeper into that, I want to turn to you, Isabel. And the U.S. has been leading the way on some of these incentives globally with the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. both of which could unlock, or together could unlock, trillions of dollars in public and private money to go into these technologies in this sector and make sure those technologies are ready. I'm curious to hear from you first how those policies and how the U.S.'s policies over the past few years have changed the game for U.S. industry, but also changed the context for international cooperation, international competition in these industries as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. Thanks everyone for joining us. I sit in the the International Affairs Office of the Department of Energy. So I manage the multilateral division that puts on the COP for the department, and G20, G7, but also the market development division. So we're really focused on international deployment. We're also focused on attracting FDI to really make the most out of our bill and IRA piece of legislation. So, I mean, I think, obviously, bill and IRA have completely changed the game for us. I mean, they're the most historic, most important pieces of legislation, climate legislation, really, and in the history of our country, I think we can say. And so we're going to have about $500 billion in investment when all is said and done over the next 10 years. And we think that this is going to make energy cheaper, more abundant, and we truly believe that this is going to help other nations go faster and further. And we'll talk about it in a little bit, but we'll talk about the types of partnerships that we're putting together that are really building on this investment. But a couple of points I wanted to raise in terms of where this positions us and the industry. I mean, I think we can't understate the level of investment that we're seeing in our infrastructure, and I think that foundational shift in infrastructure and steel in the ground, that alone in the local jurisdictions where that's happening creates such a big demand pull, not simply for clean energy technologies, but also for materials, for local community businesses. So we can't understate the economic benefit it's going to bring. So that's an industrial benefit alone. But I think in terms of the impact on our emissions profile and our climate goals, we've just done analysis and released it at the COP that we're seeing the impacts in 2030 of lowering our emissions to reduce our net greenhouse gas emissions by 40% below 2005 levels. We're going to reduce industrial manufacturing emissions up to 40% below those levels. We're going to double the share of electricity generated by clean sources from 40 to 80%. We're accelerating electrification of the vehicle fleet with the share of zero-emission light-duty vehicle sales reaching up to 65%. We're saving American families up to $38 billion in electricity bills, and this is not including gas costs. And we're reducing net crude oil imports by nearly 60% by 2030. And our theory of the case is that our investments are going to supercharge the private sector. We've already seen that happening. Since President Biden took office, we're seeing the private sector already announce more than $150 billion in new clean energy investments in the battery, electric vehicle, solar, offshore wind, and manufacturing arenas alone. And this represents hundreds of US-based manufacturing facilities. Obviously, that means jobs. And some of these investments are from US-based companies, but many from foreign companies. So in terms of the investment opportunities, they're absolutely abundant. And so it's changing the industrial market for clean energy, not just for us, but for our partners. And I think, and we've said it before, other my colleagues at the COP have said it, friendshoring is a key strategy that we want to bring in to complement these domestic investments. And we'll talk about it in a little bit. Japan is a very close partner in this, a very long-term and close partner, and we have lots of activities underway. But just to answer your first question.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Isabel. I think I'm really interested in the manufacturing points you make and the friendshoring as well, and I think we will dive into what that means for the international landscape for these industries going forward. I think, one thing I'm really interested on, just to follow up immediately on it, is the IRA is a monumentous achievement, and it's very interesting that it invests heavily in both innovation and really manufacturing, as well as ensuring supply chain access to the resources that will be needed. So it really targets the entire value chain for a lot of these technologies. And I'm curious, given that the U.S. and Japan actually historically have this comparative advantage on the innovation side, and we've seen manufacturing develop in China and elsewhere over the past couple decades. Is this, one, what is driving that turn towards the earlier stage? And two, is it changing the U.S.'s role in the industry? And we're seeing these investments elsewhere. Do you think the U.S. is sort of going from an innovator to a supplier? Or how is it changing how the U.S. interacts in these industries internationally?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say yes and yes. So I think the role, I mean, we've stated clearly that we're trying to consume clean energy and produce clean energy. We're trying to consume the products that allow us to produce clean energy, critical minerals and materials, which is one of the focuses of our department and my office. But then we want to work with partners around the world to support their ability to produce materials, to produce clean energy. And then for our businesses and for the Department of Energy, one of our top priorities, and one of the top priorities for my office, is to ensure that DOE-funded technologies, DOE-funded companies are really playing a strong role in bringing to bear the cutting-edge technology that allows our partners and friends to build clean energy industrial economies that are based on the best science. So our role, exactly as you say, we're investing in innovation. We're using those dollars to invest in companies in the U.S. to help to free up capital that they can spend in other places and bring that technology to other markets. Does that more or less answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for it.
Sure.
Jin, I'd love to turn to you and get some of your thoughts on what we've just heard and your thoughts on building investments we've seen in the U.S. as well as in Europe. And other regions to really drive development in these industries and how it affects the landscape for Japanese companies, for Japan, internationally.
Yeah, so there are several aspects, especially the IRA has a huge impact and so many investment, not just from the US inside, but also from foreign country. And Japan is definitely one of them. So one example is Panasonic. So they already announced that they will invest in Kansas, very big battery manufacturing. And also there are several renewable projects and by Japanese utilities and also trading company owning companies. So many investment and also there are many hydrogen and ammonia project, clean hydrogen ammonia project, which is still in a not just decision, not before the decision of investment, but at least a project phase. So there are so many projects ongoing. So that shows that IRA creates a huge tie between Japan and US with economic integration. So more and more investment is coming to US. Of course, in Japan, there are some concern for that, but at the same time, it's for some aspect is mutually supplemental because for hydrogen, for example, Japan has a very limited land, and for the renewables, and also we don't have natural gas inside Japan, so therefore, definitely we need to have an import from overseas. So therefore, if the Japanese company involved in production in US, and then they can export from US to Japan, that will be, new ties between Japan and the US. So therefore, in that sense, in those cases, it's beneficial. And for renewables, of course, it's locally consuming energy. So therefore, the new investment is also beneficial for both US and Japan. So therefore, that kind of bright aspect exists. But at the same time, if we see the consumer tax credit on a battery EV, for example, so IRA has a North America production provision. So therefore, Japanese auto company needs to consider to invest in US, not just exporting from Japan. So because of that incentive. So that's a kind of a choice caused by this IRA incentive. So that has not just a positive impact. So from our government point of view, we see that more, in different approaches better. So that kind of a viewpoint exists. So that kind of things. So there are several aspects. So my point is that we cannot see just one side. It's positive and negative. So definitely it will increase economic ties, but at the same time, there are different type of aspects for these things. Yeah.
Isabel, I don't know if you want to respond immediately. I have actually a related question, and I think this leads well into it. The U.S. isn't alone in having some of those provisions, and actually, I think it's fair to say that some of that was essential to getting the bill passed at all, was the domestic favor pieces of it that would support economic growth in U.S. communities that made it politically feasible to achieve. But we're seeing that elsewhere. I mean, the EU is also pouring a lot into manufacturing. We're seeing new trade restrictions around the world. Zimbabwe and Indonesia earlier this year implemented export controls on critical inputs to these technologies to ensure domestic development of the industry. And I'm curious to hear both of your thoughts on what is driving that. I mean, Isabel, you mentioned friendshoring, and that's a piece of this. It's not the whole story. So what's driving that, and how do we ensure that we are still enabling cooperation while that trend is occurring? And I do know that, Jin, you mentioned the batteries and the critical minerals, the trade deal between the U.S. and Japan that loosened some of the restrictions put in place. Is that a model for how we break this trend? Or do we need to think more critically as this trend is continuing about how we're increasing trade costs and potentially slowing the diffusion of these technologies?
You know, this is a really important question, is that it's this tension between diversification and decarbonization, right? And, you know, we absolutely respect every country's right to defend their own national security and their energy security in the way that they believe is correct. And so, you know, obviously we've now adopted a legislative package that makes the U.S. prime. And the reason for that is because we literally were not going to move forward with climate change until we paid people. Let's just put it that way. So now we have a package that's actually for the commensurate with the size of our economy. That's a real package. It puts our climate goals within reach. So, and that's what needed to happen for our jurisdiction. Otherwise, really, it wasn't going to work. So I think for other jurisdictions that are looking at a similar challenge, right, they're thinking about, so we know for a lot of emerging economies that are producing critical minerals, they want to refine those minerals. They want to get the full value of those and sort of break the trend that we've seen over the years of the resource curse, where raw materials are being extracted and not processed in these jurisdictions, and they're not getting the full value of their resources. We absolutely understand that. And so if that's what these countries want to do with that, that's their prerogative. And we've put in place domestic priorities as well. But I don't think that gets in the way of partnership at all. And I think we have multiple examples of many platforms and initiatives that are looking for ways to find common ground. And certainly we have US firms operating all over the world that are interested in working in a range of jurisdictions to help them access minerals, for example, and develop their clean energy resources. So certainly there is a tension, but for example, we're working in the IEA on minerals, working the IEA with a range of countries, and we're working on, it's called the Mineral Security Partnership. Sorry, that's a separate initiative. There's a mineral security partnership. We're working with the State Department, with Japan, with a range of countries, and that's really to look at where can we look at critical mineral projects that we may want to invest in together. And within the IEA, we're working on the Critical Minerals Working Party, which that's looking at, we're again working with our partners in Japan. We're looking to find ways to increase market transparency, to increase the information that all countries have available to be able to make the most out of their resources and to protect their assets from shocks in the marketplace. But then we have a range of other platforms, the Clean Energy Ministerial, Mission Innovation, where we're working with countries and a range of countries, emerging markets, developing countries, where we're identifying clean energy innovation, collective innovation goals, collective investment goals across a range of technologies, hydrogen, batteries, solar, et cetera. So I think that, just the short answer is, we obviously understand that there's a need for countries to defend their energy security in the way that they need to, but we're walking and chewing gum at the same time. So we already have plenty of partnerships that are looking for shared innovation goals, shared investment goals, and so there's a lot of momentum already in that direction.
Jin, do you have any thoughts on this point?
Yeah, so I agree with Isabel. So basically, policy coordination is very key. So therefore, So you mentioned many partnership already, and I fully aware of that. But so speaking of battery and critical mineral on IRA, so as you mentioned, we have a critical mineral agreement. So that's key parts to enable Japanese company to use the supply chain for the IRA's incentives. So therefore, that one example, but other than that, of course, in reality, US cannot produce every part or material. So therefore, we need to think about that and how to collaborate by using the policy mechanism is quite important. And another example is, for example, for nuclear energy. So we are pushing together the SMR technology. But how to produce an actual reactor, it's very, very challenging things. So key parts is not easily produced in one country. So therefore, Japan and Korea is one of the key partners for US. So and we are exporting some of the key parts from our countries. So therefore, in order to enable that, sometimes when DOE's permission is needed, and for that we have a policy coordination or just a simple talk is necessary. So that kind of thing already exists. So that kind of close coordination is very important to really achieve the friendshoring or supply chain enhancement. Yeah.
Maybe just to add one point, I think what's really interesting about the moment that we're in is that certainly our policy did not emerge in a vacuum, right? So our long-standing close relationships with allies and partners are just brought into the fold and take a new, we have refreshed relationships. And I think one of the areas that I think is really exciting right now, that it cools a little bit of that competitive tension, is the innovation relationship, is the science to science relationship. Because, to be frank, we're going to science our way out of this. So what's interesting, for example, with the relationship with Japan is we have a wonderful relationship with NITO. There's a lot of work happening between the science agencies that happens in parallel to the political relationship. And you can't understate how important that is, because our science agencies, our labs, are helping to change our perception of what's possible. And what's interesting right now, for example, I was just earlier at the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance event, and this is an organization that includes businesses who are trying to send a demand signal to the market for clean energy, right? And it's fundamental to the project economics of clean energy projects, right? We need that signal, we need that offtake signal so that projects can be bankable. And what's interesting about that is the companies that are involved in that, on the panel, they were mentioning that they had set, for example, GM had set a specific target, and Amazon, they had set targets on renewable energy purchasing, and they've already beat those targets. And part of it is because, for Amazon, integrating AI into the way that they procure power, for example. And similarly with GM, bringing in technology and innovation advancement to understand where they're getting their clean energy. So I think what's really exciting about the moment that we're in right now is the investment in science and the investment in innovation that Japan is making, that we are making, and our cooperation on innovation is changing our perception of what is actually possible in real time. It's moving under our feet. Right? So, and I think you cannot understate, and we should be leaning on that, how much that technical and science cooperation cools the political and competitive and geopolitical competition that's happening right now and is obviously live. So I just wanted to make that point. Just where I sit, I find that to be extremely powerful and something that we should be leaning on much more in the discourse.
I think it's a great point, and as I mentioned earlier, the U.S. and Japan are leaders on innovation. Japan is the world leader in patents on renewable energy technology. The U.S. has spearheaded a lot of the technologies that we'll need and will continue to need to develop going forward. I think I'm curious in a follow-up, and to your point, innovation has served as the foundation for a lot of progress internationally here at COP as well over the past 28 years, including cooperation with China on CCS technology before the Paris Agreement was signed. So I think it's a great point. It's a really important one. I'm curious, and you touched on some points there already, but I'm curious, as leaders in innovation, one, how do you think about maintaining that capacity to innovate? And two, what steps can we take to enhance that innovative cooperation even further? I think it's fair to say that a lot of the decoupling we're seeing, yes, innovation is we've held on to that, but there may be a threat to our scientific cooperation, and certainly there are countries outside of Japan, the U.S., the European Union that are becoming innovators that we don't engage as much at the moment. If you'd like to go first.
So there are, several approaches for how to maintain or increase innovation, and with the collaboration with the US. So of course there are existing collaboration within with METI and DOE, and also in the national laboratory level. We have many collaboration in renewables, like next generation solar is one example. We recently talked about offshore wind. So that kind of things is still an emerging stage. So therefore, we need to think about how to assess the kind of performance itself. So that could be an issue, or how to set a standard together. So that kind of things is a collaboration area. At the same time, as I mentioned earlier, so how to collaborate in the policy measures are also very important. So you mentioned NIDO. So NIDO is a funding agency of Japan under METI. And we are, funding 2 trillion yen, as you mentioned, but it's not just limited pure Japanese technology. So NIDO is also funding in US how to demonstrate the Japanese technology together with US companies. So that kind of approach is also existing. So in Los Angeles, we are having a demonstration project at the Los Angeles port, how to use hydrogen technology for forklift using the fuel cell technology, that kind of things. So there are several approaches, but definitely we need to see one by one how effective we can collaborate with government. Of course, the real main player is private sector at the end. So how to create that kind of driving force by catalyzing, so using the government sector is very important things. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the question is on capacity, maintaining the capacity, and then how do we deal with countries that perhaps we haven't engaged with as much on innovation? Okay, so a couple things. I think, not to be crude about it, but I think we need to make investments. I think we need to show real dollars towards innovation. It's about money. And I think what we're really, really pleased about is that the IRA has given us, certainly with the Department of Energy, we have a lot of money for innovation, and through the bipartisan infrastructure law. So our department was actually remade under the bill and IRA, basically. So we have a new office of clean energy demonstrations that manages about $25 billion. And the point of that office is to establish, to build facilities that demonstrate clean energy technologies, to demonstrate the feasibility and to de-risk and to learn for the market how you build a facility with a new emerging technology, right? And so that's $25 billion, that's a lot, and I think that the learning is it's not just on innovation for the technology itself, it's innovation in the way that we build these projects in the United States. So these projects have to have community benefit agreements, they have to be built in communities that are underserved. So we're seeing innovation not simply in just the clean energy technology, but in the way that these projects are managed, and we're putting big dollars on that. The other piece that I would flag that we're excited about, and I think we can do more with, is the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy, ARPA-E. Over the last 10 years, they've funded about $3 billion in clean energy projects. So this is over 1,000 patents, over 300 licenses. We have 150 new companies that have been formed from these projects. I think that those statistics kind of fly under the radar, right? And we know that our partners, like Japan, are making similar investments. I think it's politically, for us political people, I think it's really important that we elevate those investments and that we're held accountable for making the most out of those in this moment, because those are the types of technologies that are going to drive us through this transition, and that frankly will increase the speed at which we can build facilities, we can buy clean energy. So I think that that's absolutely fundamental. And so, in terms of the countries that we don't work with, we remain very hopeful that we think that science cooperation is fun. Exactly to your example, we are still cooperating with China on science issues, and that remains crucial to maintain that relationship. And we think with any country, there's an opportunity to collaborate on innovation, collaborate on science, and certainly where we've invested in technology that they can benefit from, we want to make that happen. We think that's fundamental and absolutely needed to get beyond the geopolitics and those types of tensions and really focus on the core of what this transition is about, which is getting technologies out there quickly into the marketplace and getting them up and running.
Thank you both very much. I think that's really helpful in clarifying of these issues. A follow-up on these last points, which is, the New York Times published an article yesterday saying the Inflation Reduction Act is driving large investments, corollary investments in Europe and Asia into these industries and technologies that, and to be fair, the U.S. was making that argument when the Inflation Reduction passed, that it was a call for everybody to raise their ambition and raise their investments, right? I think, that's fantastic, and the more money, the better into these industries, as we all know, and that's a key point here at COP, is we need the dollars, and it's difficult to mobilize them. There are countries that can't follow suit, right? And there are regions that can't follow suit with those investments that have resources they'd like to develop into industries and compete internationally with, and see this industry as really a way to grow and develop. And I'm curious, and of course, those countries are also home to the vast majority of energy demand growth by 2050, already account for a huge amount of energy demand today. And so how, whether it's enhancing tech diffusion or we just spoke about innovation partnerships, I think that's one avenue, but how do we make sure that those countries that really need these technologies most going forward, one, have access to them, and two, play an active role in industry development right now? I know both the U.S. and Japan have partnerships in sub-Saharan Africa. They're working with countries on that now. Clean Air Task Force actually at the last COP hosted the launch of Nigeria's CCS Center for Excellence. So that was one good example of a partnership with DOE actually. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, is that something we need to see more of? How do we ensure an active role for these countries in these industries?
Well, I'm not so good at Africa, so maybe it's better to use South America as an example, because
Please,
I have visited several times. So my understanding is that, of course, still the comparative advantage theory exists in a basic area, and I understand that not every country needs everything in one country, right? So in that sense, if we start from the assumption that every clean technology needs to be within the one country, then it's a very serious situation. But if each country can focusing on where they have a more advantage, then it's better. So, for example, in Chile, so they have very huge potential for wind or the solar. So, therefore, a Japanese company already invests in therefore the project for the using the wind power and also solar and creating a hydrogen from that. So that kind of things already exist. Of course, it's not necessarily mean that they have abundant power for the powerful incentive for creating battery EV, for example, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are less advantageous for the clean energy or clean transition itself. So therefore, focusing on not just, how can I say, the comparison in a big picture, but also focusing on what is a strong point in each country is a better way and a safer way to argue this kind of topics. And some.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways. I think that I would agree with the point that countries can make the most of their own resources, and certainly, will start to develop their clean energy resources based on, what their assets look like domestically. And to be clear, Department of Energy is not a development agency. We don't have a giant international development budget, so we're not USAID. But we certainly work with a range of countries on clean energy deployment. So just a couple of examples I would give is we have an initiative called Net Zero World, and we're working with a group of countries to help them decarbonize their energy systems. So again, focused on innovation, we're working with the national labs, and the countries are Argentina, Chile, Egypt, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Ukraine. And it was launched at COP a couple years ago, and essentially the model is that we work with these countries to figure out what is their clean energy goal, what is their deployment goal, and in many cases we bring in a national lab, and the national lab will do sort of an energy assessment for them, help them to do the analysis to understand how could they make the best use of a specific asset, or perhaps that asset is not so helpful in this particular type of energy system. So some of them are interested in geothermal, or some of them are interested in bringing in sort of a far-off asset into an urban area. So that's basically the approach that we've taken with a range of countries. The other platform that we've been working very closely with a range of countries is in the Clean Energy Ministerial, that has a number of different work streams focused on clean energy. And what's interesting about that platform is that it essentially allows us to talk about policy frameworks related to specific energy technologies. And there's a lot of learning that happens across the membership, and especially emerging market countries that really want to learn about how to bring in and certainly attract our investors' attention to their markets. So there's a lot of sharing that happens there. So there's a few platforms like that, and certainly the State Department has a range of platforms working with sub-Saharan Africa. And as you mentioned, we work in Nigeria on CCUS, but also we are working with Mozambique. Our Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management has a mineral sustainability division, and we're working with Mozambique to help, and we've done a couple workshops with them to help them think through how they might decarbonize their mining sector a bit more to make it more attractive for the markets that are hoping to buy minerals and provide a green premium for very high standard minerals. They have some challenges regarding security and human rights and a range of other issues. So we're kind of helping them think through how they might use some new mining techniques and some new mining practices to improve the prospect of use of Mozambique mined minerals for the broader market, for example.
Fantastic. I see a question in the audience, actually. If you'd like to stand and just speak loudly so we can hear you over all the noise, please.
Okay, thank you. My name is Maria Elena Durazo, and I'm a California State Senator, and I represent Los Angeles. And I've been working on very much connected with this, what should be the industrial policy at a time of climate change. And I am very proud of the Biden administration for the way that they are approaching the new industrial policy under all the needs that we have facing us with climate change. So in Los Angeles, over the years, we've developed different parts of what policy should be, a construction careers policy, a manufacturing policy, and they work really well to include labor standards, to include, as you said, Ms. Miriam, community benefits, and all of this with the idea that we're moving forward with a new economic system, one that's going to benefit everybody and not leave anybody behind. So I guess, how do we make sure we do that, at a level higher than Los Angeles? The Biden administration is trying to do that at a national level. But it seems to me, and I'm very proud that Governor Newsom just signed the bill, SB 150, also referring to labor standards and community benefits. So you all are dealing more on the international level. I want to see what do we need to do, what can we do to inject that even further? Because it's just not going to work if people get left behind. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Any quick reactions?
Yeah, I mean, I think just a couple of points. That was super helpful I'm not sure if folks could hear, but talking about LA's great work and California's great work on clean energy and including the workforce issues. We haven't touched on that yet, actually. And I think that one of the areas of of deep collaboration with a range of jurisdictions is on the clean energy workforce, because all of our assumptions on deployment assume a highly qualified workforce that's available at the time we need it to deploy, right? And labor considerations and labor protections are of the highest priority for the Biden-Harris administration, certainly. But with our partners, with Japan, with other G7 partners, high ESG standards in general are a very high priority. So, for example, in this clean energy ministerial, we have a work stream that I'm forgetting the name of, but it's focused on the clean energy workforce. We have a partnership with LinkedIn, and part of the objective of that partnership is to really analyze the clean energy, the existing workforce we have right now in the fossil sectors, to try to understand, are there workers that we may be able to, in the range of clean energy ministerial member countries, India, a whole host of countries, can we look at the workforce that we have and the extent to which they might be translated and be able to shift their expertise with training to the clean energy industry. And so that's just one initiative, but there's a range of initiatives, and certainly within Department of Energy, we have a lot of initiatives focused on clean energy workforce and minerals and materials workforce, but that's a great place to cooperate on, and certainly it's a global issue. It needs more attention because it's fundamental to the economics of these clean energy projects that we're trying to move forward. I don't know if Ginny, you have thoughts.
Yeah, so just to follow up, between Japan and US, we are pretty in line with that kind of idea. So on MSP, we already discussed how to include ESP type of things, and also, as I mentioned, the critical mineral agreement between Japan and the US in the context of IRA. The labor consideration is one of the key things, and so therefore, of course, when it comes to in detail, there are differences, but as a concept, we are very much in alignment. So therefore, I think, I agree with you.
That's great, and thank you again for the question. I want to underline this point, and then we'll go to another question of the importance of workforce and making sure labor is available for these technologies and these industries. And something we've been working on a lot recently with nuclear energy is the need for a workforce for that, and that is a highly specialized workforce that is actually very, very scarce at the moment. And so how do we make sure that's available? How do we make sure that it's used frequently and often enough that it stays in shape for further use? And I think your point that this is something we need to be cooperating on internationally to make sure that best practices are shared, but also the training practices and how we get people quickly up to speed. And the Centers for Excellence, I think, have been very encouraging in that regard. So just wanted to underline the importance of that and how we need to think about human capital, skilled human capital being available everywhere on the planet. I mean, even as we're competing in these industries, when we're deploying them elsewhere, we need skilled folks on the ground to make sure that that's done efficiently and effectively. So I think really excellent question and points. Tara, please.
Tara Rogers, I'm with the Clean Air Task Force. I oversee our geothermal solutions sector. And this question is meant to be broader. You mentioned earlier sort of doing the most you can with what you have. So this could apply to precious minerals, in my case, it would be peak. But the question or the proposition I have is that a lot of the innovation that has to happen in the sector needs to happen in situ and really sort of where it is most economical first. And so what are your countries, your mutual countries, how do you think about pilots in the form of innovation? Are you investing in it? Are we willing to invest in situ innovation when in locations where you can't do it eventually?
So the question is, are we willing, is the US and Japan willing, and more broadly, I think, developed countries that are investing in innovation, willing to invest in pilot projects and C2 projects where the resources are cheapest and most accessible to prove and demonstrate these technologies at scale, even if it's an international project. Captured that right, I hope. And I'd love to hear both of your thoughts.
Well, I mean, I can tell you right now, I don't have the exact answer to that because we at this point, from a statutory standpoint, we don't have a line in the budget that gives us the resources to do those kinds of investments. We certainly have resources to work, for example, work with a jurisdiction with a national lab to assess the potential of a geothermal project, how it fits into their energy mix, et cetera. But in terms of the capital to invest in a pilot project, we don't have those resources in the DOE budget, but I can go back and double check, but we don't have that. We certainly have for domestic use. We have our Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations has a $25 billion budget to do in the U.S. clean energy demonstration projects, and they have an application for that, et cetera. But we don't have those resources to do an international project on those. I don't think we would be, in principle, against demonstration. We certainly support demonstration. And then we have another platform we work on called Mission Innovation that has a range of missions on a whole host of clean energy issues that is looking to both get the members to commit funds to RD&D, and in some cases conduct demonstrations. So each of the jurisdictions that are part of that initiative bring to the initiative their own domestic experience with demonstration, et cetera. But in terms of your specific question of an actual budget, we don't have one. Yeah.
So in Japan's case, typically to demonstrate the technology itself, it's usually will be done in Japan. But when it comes to the application of the technology, so the first application or that kind of things can be done in other countries like US and so on. So the Los Angeles port example is one of the examples. So the technology itself is already there, but whether we can really use it for the, fuel cell-based machine or not. So that's a kind of a new trial. So in that sense, it's we haven't same project in Japan. So it's US is a world first project funded by Japanese agency. So that kind of things exist. Another example is that hydrogen combustion engine. So it's now, if I remember correctly, in Utah. So it was funded also by NEDOS, and that was also kind of trial, how to really applicable or not. So that kind of things also exist. But for example, when we really start the possibility of CCS in Japan, definitely we need to test in Japan. So therefore, we have a project in Hokkaido to store the CO2 deep inside of our ground. So that project is in Hokkaido here.
Excellent. Thank you both so much. I have two final questions before we wrap up. And the first is really, we've touched on a lot of important topics here for international collaboration going forward. I'm curious, one, we've talked a lot about how we enhance it. I'm curious whether it's a technology or an area such as standards or reporting, what do you think is the most important area for us to be collaborating on, maybe just we'll say in the next year before the next COP? And what steps do you think we need to take to make sure that happens?
Wow. That's a hard question to answer. The most important area, I think it depends on where you sit. So my office manages trade issues and supply chains and critical minerals. That's why I've been talking about it so much. So I think fundamental to all of our clean energy goals are that we have the materials needed to produce the clean energy technologies. And I think that certainly a priority for us this year is to move forward with Japan led the G7 critical minerals working group and came out with a 5-point plan. We came up with a 5-point plan together on critical minerals, and it addresses a range of issues. One of the issues is on standards. It's on ESG standards. I think for the mining sector in particular, and including the battery mineral production and processing sector, we need to work on ESG standards, transparency, and traceability and verification. It's fundamental, and it's absolutely linked to the production of these materials, and it's linked to the 30D IRA EV tax credit, because and it's certainly linked to the notion that Japan, the U.S., and other jurisdictions that we're collaborating with, we would like to be able to provide a green premium 2 companies that can produce minerals and materials to a certain standard of ESG, certain standard of traceability, et cetera. But there's really a mix of standards at play right now. So there's a lot of work that we're doing right now within the IEA, within the US, domestically in the interagency, to try to unpack which are the standards that are most important for our jurisdictions, to what extent can the market actually implement those standards, is it feasible, how does it work, do we need a phase-in period? And so those conversations are live right now, and certainly for the mining sector, and those are fundamental in order for, those standards need to work in order for us as buyers of these minerals, as supporters of these projects, that we can actually send the market signal that needs to be sent to ensure that the performance at the production level and the processing level meets what we believe is the highest global standard. So I would say standards is probably a place where we need to work. There's other stuff too, but that's a place we're going to work this year.
Well, yeah, it's a very tough question, and but of course, when we measure by the amount of the money, for example, then of course battery V or battery itself or nuclear or LNG. So that's a billions of money, but. I agree with Isabel. So because critical mineral is a kind of a growing, important area, and we need to have a policy coordination, and we need to definitely find a kind of a joint effort for the specific project. So in that sense, we have many things to do. So in that sense, it's very important area, and without government efforts, it's very, very challenging, and that affect to the other industry, so battery industry and also the offshore wind and other technology. So therefore, in that sense, critical mineral is very important.
Well, thank you both for fielding a difficult question. Unfortunately, I think we have to wrap, but I have one very fast question for both of you before we do, which is just, I'm trying to end on a positive note. I actually think the conversation has been very encouraging, and we found a lot of ground for collaboration today. But I want to ask, what makes you optimistic in the year ahead? What's one thing that you think shows that maybe we're not on the right path? The global stock take certainly suggests we're not on it. But what's something that you expect to happen in the next year that maybe puts us closer to that path and gets us closer to on track?
Look, as an American that's been watching climate policy for a long, long time, we are so much better than we were a few years ago. I mean, leaps and bounds better. I mean, and also I work at the Department of Energy, which is a great place to work, because we're putting money on the table. We are paying for projects. There will be, next year when we meet again, there will be projects moving forward. And they're not going to be small projects. They're going to be big projects. And these are fundamentally changing the economics of clean energy technologies. So that makes me so hopeful. And I think and again, we talked about it earlier, the other thing that makes me hopeful is the science, is engaging with the scientists that are on the cutting edge of the technologies that we need to move us forward. That's who we need to be talking to. That's which should be driving our thinking about what is possible. And there's a saying that says that a mind once stretched by a new idea never regains its original shape. And engaging with the Japanese scientists that we engage with, engaging with the lab scientists, that gives me hope. They are just on top of it. And as I said before, we're going to science our way out of this, and we need to really lean in on that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I also try to be positive and optimistic. And yeah, so of course, there are so many challenges left, but here in COP, we saw many initiatives already launched, announced, and so on. And not just renewables, but also hydrogen, carbon management, and nuclear, and even fusion comes to the list. So therefore, we have so many new activities, new commitments. So therefore, that's bring us some hope. So of course, how to implement that is another question. But at least comparing without those announcements with, current situation, it's much better than before. So therefore, I have still hope, and I try to be optimistic. Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much, and I'll echo those positive sentiments. I think we've seen a lot of great progress at COP so far. Hopefully that will continue now in the second week. But thank you, Jen. Thank you, Isabel, for your insightful comments. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for being here. We have another conversation in an hour on the geopolitics of climate action. Hope you'll join us there. But thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to the audience. And we hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.